What is going on, peeps? So look, I'm gonna just kind of play you a big portion of the interview that recently happened with the president of Iraq, Soleil. So before we get into it, just real quick, let me do a disclaimer. I am not an attorney, a tax advisor, or financial advisor. Please consult with real professionals. The following is my opinion and my opinion only based on my own research. I will share the information I find with you and encourage you to read or listen to it and then come up with your own opinion. Okay, so having said that, look, there's a conversation with the president of Iraq I think you guys would be interested in. And I want to take the time to thank and give a shout out to Brendan. I believe it's pronounced Beard. I hope I said that right. Brendan sent this article over to me, or I should say a YouTube video to me, and told me to check it out. So I've checked it out, and I think it's interesting because this president is going to talk about, one, the new government that he has appointed and who they are and what he hopes to accomplish. Two, in here, he's talking about the economy and the fact that they have to stop relying on oil and really develop. And they need to get back to where they were, which is one of the richest nations anywhere. Three, they're going to talk about the One Belt Initiative, which is very interesting. For those you don't know what the One Belt Initiative, this is a movement by China. Okay, this is a movement by China. So China has invited Iraq to come join them on the One Belt Initiative. This was part of a plan by China to take over the trade routes. So listen to what he has to say about it, okay? So I'm not going to interfere like I normally do. I usually talk over him, but I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to play this. I'm going to play this all the way through so you guys can check it out because this is important. It should tell you about the direction that Iraq is going in. Here we go.
Thanks very much for letting us know that, Mr. President. And I noted that today on that front, on the transparency front, Iraq took a positive step in terms of lifting the suspension of Reuters, their license. And I know that you had personally pledged to look into that and play a role in that. So kudos for at least addressing that aspect of it. And I want to turn, if I might, to the political stalemate in Iraq. Since Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi submitted his resignation last November, there has been something of the stalemate continuing. The two previous candidates you nominated to replace him were not able to win majority support. But the current nominee, Mustafa al-Khademi, the head of the intelligence service, seems to be faring better. And I might note that even though intelligence service, or al-Mukhabarat, as it's called in Arabic, often has a negative connotation in the Middle East, Mustafa al-Khademi has actually an interesting background. He was actually a human rights activist in his past. But could I ask you, what are your expectations for his agenda? What will be the top issues on his list of things that you would like to see him address? And could you let us know if we might see early elections in Iraq?
Well, Mr. Kademi, whom I know is a friend of yours as well as mine, and we go back a long time, he has quite a background in human rights campaigning, in the campaign for the human rights of the Iraqi people, as well as he was a former journalist. So he comes in with a lot of political support from within Iraq, from within the Shia community, within the Kurds and the Sunnis, and people have higher hopes that he will be able to convene his government before long. And Iraq needs an interim government in order to embark on a number of things. Number one, first and foremost, is making sure that the fight against COVID-19 is maintained and ends hopefully with the eradication of this disease in our country as well as in the rest of the world. But also we have a very dire economic crisis with the collapse of oil prices. We also have the issue of early elections that we all have pledged to, that this early election should take place, hopefully no later than next year, within a year of the formation of the new government, or a bit more maybe. And most of the political parties have committed to that. And Iraq needs elections as a way to end the political uncertainty and the dynamics that has ensued certainly after the protest movement last October. We are hopeful, I'm hopeful, that Kadhimi will be the person who will be able to steward the country in that direction. This country has gone through a lot over the past few years. Certainly last year has not been easy at all. For the range of issues, we have been experiencing beneath what I would consider to be the ultimate perfect storm. Imagine we're in the heart of the Islamic world, in the heart of the Middle East, political dynamics, a protest movement that has swept the country, people demanding reform and change of the government and demanding job opportunities, declining oil prices, economic crisis, now COVID-19, the dynamics between the United States, Iran, and the Arab world. These are all happening at the same time. And Baghdad, well, if you look at the map, is truly the heart of the Islamic Middle East and is the place where all these at play. So Kadhimi will have a very, very tough challenge ahead of him. And we are all hopeful that he will be able to steer the country in the right direction, leading to early elections, because this is what we need to have. We need to give the people of Iraq an opportunity to decide for themselves what form of government, what type of government they want for the future. What happened with the last election in 2018, 17, 18 was quite a problem. Nearly 70% of the Iraqi population stayed away from voting and did not take part in the elections because they had lots of misgivings about the integrity of the elections and the legitimacy of the election process. With the change in the election law that we have instituted, with the new electoral commission that we have put in place, and hopefully with the new government that will take charge soon, this will be an opportunity for Iraqis to revive their interest and revive their confidence in the political process. Because at the end of the day, again, I go back and remind myself, we're talking the heart of the Middle East, the heart of the Islamic world. Usually former governments end up in jails and end up in the gallows. Here we have changed the government and through a parliamentary process, and a new government hopefully will be put in place through a parliamentary process without anybody ending up in a nasty situation. So that I don't want to justify the delay in the government formation that we have witnessed over the past few months, but nevertheless, this is also an important statement about the type of Iraq that we're talking about. Messy, difficult, ineffective in so many ways, its governance, but nevertheless, it's a different brand of politics than what we've had in the past or what we have in our neighborhood in a way.
Thank you. So if I could ask you, you referenced the so-called tuk-tuk protests, and they really did seem to tap into this well of anger over services, corruption, governance, jobs, as you mentioned. And as I saw the demands that were coming out from the protests, it reminded me of many of our conversations over the years and the kinds of things that you have emphasized as well. So I want to ask you to dig down a little bit, because I know you like to get into the details of policy. I mean, what sort of specific policy changes do you think can be effectuated to address those demands?
Really, the problem in societies like Iraq, especially oil-dependent societies, the dependency on the state is huge, but the ability of the state to deliver is also limited, especially in the context of declining oil revenues. And this will be the biggest challenge that Iraq will have. Iraq needs fundamental, like the rest of the Middle East for that matter, but in the case of Iraq is far more pronounced and far more profound. Iraq needs fundamental economic reforms, one of which will be really help revive the private sector, enabling it. And one key way of doing so will have to be ending and trying to combat the corruption that is so endemic, not just to the economic dynamics of the country, but also to the politics and governance of the country. Without combating corruption, you would not change the political economy of conflict in our societies. And this is a consequence also, by the way, to Western security, because it is this political economy that keeps chaos, that allows extremists, including terrorists, to flourish and keeps you back into this quagmire of, defeating an insurgency only to resurface again. Because these extremism thrive on joblessness, on hopelessness of the youth, on lack of opportunities, on sense of injustice that many sectors of our societies face. So I would definitely put down corruption and combating corruption as a top priority of any government or any political system that wants to survive and to be of service to its people. That also means jobs, jobs, and jobs for our young people. In Iraq, like the rest of the Middle East, by the way, we have legions of unemployable graduates that are a function or a product of a debilitated education system that is unable to produce capable graduates that can go and function and contribute to a vibrant economy. Obviously, this is going to be huge. In the case of Iraq, let me give you numbers. We are nearly 30 million population, of which nearly 70% are below the age of 30. It's a huge, huge sector of our society. Young people who are aspiring to meaningful jobs and want to contribute to their economy and to their nation. And depending on state economy and oil supply, oil revenues alone will not be able to do it. This requires fundamental reforms. So it's a cycle, Puneet, cycle between the reforms that are needed in order to maintain the social peace and social stability, but also is an ever need for creating more jobs and expanding the economy, especially in countries like Iraq that has such a young population. I hope with the new elections a year or so from now, these will be the type of fundamental decisions that Iraq will be focused on. And to be fair to Iraq and its political leadership over the past few years, not to absolving myself or my colleagues of major responsibility of the way things have gone, but this country has suffered so much, 40 years of conflict, 40 years of conflict. And everybody, almost everybody, has been involved through proxies and making sure that Iraq is part of whatever power games, regional power games. This country has had very little opportunity to stabilize and to move on. My hope is that we here really focus on the top priorities that we have, namely jobs for our kids, developing our economy, and doing what is right for our people. With that, I think we can also offer the rest of the Middle East a lot of help in terms of stabilizing the regional order.
Thank you, Mr. President, and we will wish you success in that endeavor. It's critical not just for Iraq, but for everyone. If I could now turn to something you just mentioned about proxies. Tensions between the United States and Iran have, as you well know, have intensified. Iran seems to have decided to turn Iraq into something of a battlefield for its differences with the United States. In January, the United States carried out a strike that killed Qasem Soleimani, and Iran retaliated with missile strikes on Iraqi bases that were housing US forces. More recently, President Trump has warned that Iran will pay a heavy price if its proxies attack American troops. And then we saw recently that General Soleimani's successor actually visited Baghdad during some of these government formation discussions. Finally, the New York Times reported that the US has actually, the Pentagon has drawn up plans for an extensive military campaign against Iraqi militia should there be an escalation from the other side. So I just want to ask a couple of basic questions. Is Iraq able to protect American troops in the country? And what is your overall perspective on the U.S.-Iran conflict?
If I were to put things, step back a bit and look at why, identify the reasons, factors that have allowed this dynamics to develop and this instability to ensue. There are many, many reasons why we have this unstable order in the Middle East, including US-Iran relations. There are many, many factors for this, no doubt. But I would identify one major factor for having contributed to regional instability. And I would identify this as probably the most important reason why Iraq has been condemned to this cycle of instability over the past at least 15 years or 20 years or so, not to count in what happened under Saddam Hussein. The reason, in my view, is the lack of a strong, stable, sovereign Iraqi state. Iraqi sovereignty has been undermined over the years through a variety of factors, interventions, actions by local and outside actors. If Iraq were to survive, if the neighborhood were to be stabilized, agreement on supporting the notion of a sovereign, stable state in Iraq is absolute key. This has to be definitely an Iraqi requirement, an Iraqi decision, an Iraqi national project. We should not wait for others to tell us, do this or not do this. This is our decision. This is what Iraq needs, because a compromised state cannot be at peace with itself and not at peace with its neighbors. And we're telling all our neighbors, and we're telling the rest of the world, this is the project that we need the support for. Iraqis should decide their own fate by themselves. No intervention and no dictation to Iraq. This will not work. Many have tried it and has only led to weakening Iraq, undermining Iraq's stability, but also others have also suffered. I would say that the United States of America, leading the international coalition in the fight against ISIS, obviously is a very important partner to Iraq, has been an important partner to Iraq. Now is calling for a strategic dialogue with the new government of Iraq in June. This is a very significant development. A whole host of issues will be raised between, according to the strategic dialogue, including issues of economic partnership, culture, you name it, those issues that are defined within the strategic framework agreement, but also the status of American forces in Iraq. There is a decision in Iraqi parliament about withdrawal of American troops, foreign troops from Iraq. We need to sit down together and discuss in a very candid and very direct way about the mission, about the process by which these forces are operating in Iraq. They are operating here at the behest of the Iraqi government, at the invitation of the Iraqi government to fight ISIS. How do you define the mission? How do you go over that? And how do you address the mutual concerns, both Iraq as well as the United States and the international coalition, not just the protection of forces. The Americans are not here for force protection. They are here to fight ISIS and help the Iraqi forces fight ISIS. This dynamics is not good for the United States, is not good for Iraq. And it should be an Iraqi decision. Iraqis will have to decide based on their own priorities and their own security requirements with the help of the United States in order to achieve this. As to Iran, Iran is an important neighbor of Iraq. We have 1,400 kilometers of borders with Iran, and you simply cannot ignore Iran as a factor in both the national security policy of Iraq and the way we look at our neighborhoods. Not to mention other cultural and ethnic relations that bind the two neighboring nations, etc. and so on. But at the end of the day, we're neighbors, and the relationship needs to be a good relationship based on a state-to-state relationship. An Iraqi state with the Iranian state, basically neither sides want to go back to past decades where we were in a state of conflict. This is not good for Iraq. This is not good for Iran. This is not good for the neighborhood. My hope is that our neighbors, including Iran, my hope is that the international community all will agree on one common theme: supporting a sovereign Iraqi state that truly represents the wishes and the wills of the Iraqi people, because at the end of the day, this is the only viable project that can keep this country viable, that can keep this country, and this is most important, at peace with itself and at peace with its neighbors. None of us want to go back to the days of Saddam Hussein, when this tyrant who was committing genocide against Iraqis, against Kurds, Arabs, and others, and also committing wars of aggression against his neighbors, whether in Iran or Kuwait. We need, again, a sovereign Iraqi state that is at peace with itself and at peace with its neighbors and is able to defend the interests of its people. This mission, I would not be misleading if I say has not been entirely achieved over the past years for a variety of reasons. But now Iraq's way out of the political turbulence and instability is really a common national project of Iraq based on the notion of a sovereign Iraqi state, hopefully with the support of all our neighbors, with the support of the international community. Going back to the old days is not an option.
Thank you, Mr. President. And while you were speaking, we had gotten a question actually about what Iraq was doing in terms of the relationship with the United States, and I think you addressed that well with respect to the upcoming strategic dialogue.
We have a very important opportunity, this strategic dialogue, and I think that I know agencies of the Iraqi government are already getting mobilized in order to prepare for it. This will be of, as the name suggests, of strategic consequence to Iraq, and we are all taking it very seriously and an important opportunity.
Thank you. Another question that has come in relates to the steep decline in oil prices. And it's seen as a major challenge because, as you well know, the revenue from oil funds a huge portion of your budget. That budget was already under stress. And I believe the budget actually pegged the price of oil at $56 a barrel. You look at the market today, it's under 30, and that's for Brent. West Texas is even lower. And so, you know, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that there was a $40 billion deficit without this recent problem. How are you going to manage through this with such a sizable deficit? Will you have cuts, payrolls being slashed, you know, borrowing, all of the above? How do you expect to get through this?
Wallahi, Puneet, this will be the mother of all challenges for Iraq in so many ways. The impact is huge because you have such a sizable public payroll. A lot of people depend on state public pay to survive, and the economy is so critically dependent on oil revenues. This is going to be a huge, huge challenge for us. I know the government already is working on developing a number of plans because the budget is still before Parliament. The budget has not been approved because of the government has resigned. So we're looking at a variety of instruments, including conversations that will be had before long with the World Bank and the IMF and other international institutions. But definitely, we will be before some very, very tough choices. My hope is that as we do that, making sure that the you know, bulk of society, or at least the poorer segments of society, are protected, because the impact of this, together with COVID-19, is just absolutely devastating to people's livelihoods. As I said earlier, this COVID-19, together with this collapse of oil prices and, you know, suspension of economic activities in those societies, of course, it's really a terrible dilemma between lives and livelihoods. You have to protect lives, deal with it, and at the same time, we really need to be smart and really attentive to the fact that people's livelihoods needs to be protected. In the case of Iraq, this is even more dire given the decline of oil prices. So I think we will be we'll be faced with some very tough choices, and we'll have to deal with it as I can.
Thanks, Mr. President. Another question has come in on the relationship between Baghdad and the Kurdistan regional government, with which you are very familiar. How do relations currently stand? I mean, there have been a lot of tensions in that in the past. It seems that things calmed down in the last couple of years, but where do things stand right now?
Actually, today I received a delegation that came from Kurdistan region to visit with Baghdad on budget issues. And this is an ongoing saga. Almost every year with every budget cycle, we will have this thing. There seems to be some good progress on the issue of oil. KRG is offering the oil 250,000 barrels a day to be taken on by Baghdad, and as a way of solving the budget dilemma between Erbil and Baghdad. We are working, trying to make sure that this is seen to a closure, especially with the formation of the new government, that this is done. But I do not want to underestimate, at the end of the day, in the day and age of depleted revenues as well, the dynamics grow more tense and more difficult. But hopefully we are all committed to making sure that we adhere to the Constitution, and that especially the share of ordinary people and their livelihoods are protected across the country, from Kurdistan to the south to other parts of Iraq. This is going to be an issue before us in the weeks and months ahead of us.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know you have to go soon, so I'll ask you one last question, if I might, that has come in. As you know, the Asia Society has a wide geography. You're in the western part of the geography that the Asia Society covers, and we also look on the other part of the Asian continent, as you do as well. And so we have a question here on the Belt and Road Initiative, which Iraq announced, I believe, last October that it wanted to join. And so the question is, may I kindly ask the President what his expectations are with regard to the Belt and Road Initiative, how Iraq will...
the what, sorry?
Sorry?
The what? Which initiative?
The Belt and Road Initiative. And how you will engage with that. If I might add on to that, you know, we've seen other countries have some benefits, but also some of the challenges associated with debt that come along with that. And so we just want to understand how Iraq intends to engage with that.
If you're referring to the visit by Mr. Adel Abdul Mahdi to China and some of the memorandum of understanding that have been signed during that visit, if that is what you're talking about, obviously China is a rising economic power and is becoming more of an economic partner to Iraq and many other countries in the Middle East. Iraq is interested in acquiring Chinese help and finance for infrastructure projects, and obviously China will be a major importer of Iraqi oil. This is what we expect, and this is what is already, and this is the context of that relationship. But if you go back to history, Iraq, Persia, India, and all of those places were all part of quite an amazing network of trade and movement of people throughout history. These ancient civilizations have always been connected, and in this day and age of globalized economy and so on, it's only natural that we will all try to come together, create infrastructure that will enable more and more facilitation of trade and exchange of people and goods across our borders, as we have seen in recent times.
Thank you so much. And perhaps with that positive vision of Iraq's past, we might be able to take that forward, and that's probably a very good note to end on.
Thank you.
We wish you success in the formation of this government, and more generally as Iraq, inshallah, moves to a better place. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you to the audience. Thank you.
Part of our city season now.